doing out there in
crashing,
area roads?
inconsistent
Are people
temperatures
staying
on
in
the
their
chip
lanes?
shortening its
They
life.
are staying in their lane. I
The
just
thermal
have
pace
no
only
longer
feels
have the
very
record for the
small
worst
air gaps
sports blooper
between the
on
two
Daybreak
surfaces.
anymore. So
The
thank
pace
you,
is much
Justin.
better at
All
heat
right,
transfer
take a
than
look
air
at how
is.
we are doing out there.
So what
along
we're going
area
to do
roadways.
here
We're
is install a
I-94 corridor
half
looking pretty
pea-sized
good.
bit of
No
thermal
crashes or
paste on the
slowdowns here.
CPU.
Now, let's see if I can hit some of these pins. I just have to say, my high school bowling coach must be so disappointed in me after guttering those first two this morning. To make up for it, we're going to try to go for this spare here.
No,
We are
go over
reporting
our
live in
CPU
Wyoming this
cooler.
morning.
Now it's very
Justin
important
Kolar.
to make sure that
News
you
8.
only set
Come on,
up
baby.
and downward force on this. You never want to place it sideways
so
or at an
close.
angle. When you're sure that you're getting your placement
You
correct,
should-
you
all of
place
us
it
wanted you to pick
straight
up that
down
spare. I mean, you
on the
could hear a pin
CPU
drop
so
in
the
this
two
place.
places come into contact with each other at pretty much
We
the
really
same
didn't
time.
want you to strike
No
out.
one wanted
check
it.
your mounting
my
points.
gosh, no one wanted it worse than I
And if
did.
you're
Let me tell
happy with
you.
how it's all situated,
Redemption.
you can
We'll see
start
you back
screwing
here at
these
6 o'clock.
items down.
Well, based on my last performance, guys, this award I got in high school should come as no surprise to you. Last place
Now
award.
ensure that when
We're
you're
gonna show you
fastening your heat
coming up
sink
why
down,
bowling
that you
alleys
go in a
across the
diagonal
state say that
pattern
they
and
can be opened
evenly spread
safely.
the
Take a
force
look.
of the fasteners down while you're attaching the heat sink. This is quite important to ensure that your thermal paste
Bowling
is
alleys across the
distributed evenly
state have
as you do
filed
it
legal
up.
action against Governor Whitmer because they say they can get the ball rolling safely.
So now that's all fastened down.
One
To
of these
move on to
times he's going to
installing
get
the
it,
fan.
Casey.
So on
Good
the side
morning,
of the
it's
fan
6
here, you
o'clock.
see
I'm
that there's
Teresa
two
Lee.
arrows.
I'm
One of them
Casey
indicates
Jones,
the airflow through the
Daybreak
fan.
strikes right now.
What we want to do here is if this is the bottom and this is the back of the case, we want the air to flow through the CPU cooler and exhaust out the back
I
and
think
top.
it might be
So
time
the way
to
we have
retire
this oriented,
this old
that
thing
the
that I got in high
air
school,
will suck
last place
through
award
the
after getting
fan
that
here,
strike on
through the
live
CPU and
television.
exhaust out the
I don't know
back
about
and
you guys,
top
but I
of the
think
case.
I might go for the
Solid
double.
on,
It only took 5
ensure it's
times.
clipped in
But
firmly.
You are a
and you're in
testament
business.
of if at
Maybe I'm
first
being
you
And what we
don't
have here is a
succeed.
4-pin CPU fan connector
do
that
it
we're going to
once and
plug
say
into the
that you did.
motherboard.
Come on,
4-pin
Justin.
allows for variable speed to be controlled from a closed-loop system,
Where are the
which
gutter
means
balls?
that
They
the
had a
fan
couple of
speed
those
can
too,
be
right?
controlled by your
Good
motherboard,
job.
which is
That was
determined
good.
by the
It's
temperature of your
difficult under
CPU.
pressure, right?
Redemption.
Bowling centers across the state filed legal action against Governor Whitmer yesterday because they say they can get the ball
Now it's time
rolling
to install our motherboard into the case. Now, if we have a look at the back of the motherboard,
Well, at least it wasn't an actual gutter ball.
you'll
this
see
time,
we've got
right,
a whole
Casey?
lot of through-hole
I mean,
parts which are conductive.
He did get the strike.
If these touch
He
the
does-
back
he's
of
got
the
the
case,
strike.
which is
So it doesn't
also
matter
so
what happens
conductive,
now.
your motherboard
Here
or
on
other
out,
components won't
Justin
enjoy it.
Kolar's had a spectacular morning on the way.
So what we need to do is provide an insulating air
probably
gap
should have
in the form of
quit
a
while he
riser,
was
as
ahead.
seen here.
Yeah, after you throw a
Now,
strike,
looking at
done.
the
you don't
motherboard,
throw it
we need to
anymore.
find our through-hole mounting
Right,
points.
Terry?
Oh,
On this
yeah,
particular
exactly.
board, we have 6 mounting
He's going to say it
points,
was the mask.
which need to
It got in the
correspond
way
to what
of
you
him being
install
able to
inside the case
throw the ball.
or what
Anyway,
has already been
aren't there
pre-installed.
holes in that ball? I mean, he's holding it like... Anyway.
Now,
Really
the
hope I
method that
don't
I'm
throw
using
this
for
Cubs
determining
bowling
the
ball in the
distance
gutter.
from the mounting points is the very scientific thumb method.
Spectrum
This
Entertainment
method works
Complex
quite
here in
well
Wyoming
for me,
doesn't only
but
have
for a
bowling,
more
they also
accurate way
have
to
virtual
identify the
golf, and they say
locations, I
this
suggest
too
putting
can
a
be opened
suitable
safely
sized
if you really
piece of
want to see
paper
something
under the
embarrassing.
board and tracing the mounting holes
Stay
through.
tuned. Oh, yep, there it
Then
is.
mount your risers with respect to this. To check
Is your
correct
high school
placement
golf
when
coach
you've
gonna weigh
installed the
in on this
risers,
one now,
you can place the
Justin?
piece of
Let's see if
paper
I
on
can.
top and push the risers through your paper to ensure they're all placed as you've traced them.
Not bad.
Check that the quantity
Based on my
and
pitiful
placement of your
performance this
risers
morning with
correspond
those
to your
multiple gutter
motherboard.
balls, and then let's
Now,
just
there
not
may
even
be
talk
other
about
riser
the
positions
golf
under the
swing,
board
the
here,
last
which
15 minutes or
correspond to
so.
different motherboard
I think I want to take a
configurations.
second here
By
to
ensuring
really
that you
focus,
only have the correct
try to
number
get another
in
strike.
the
I had
correct
one
place,
earlier, so
the support should
give
be
me just
adequate
a
for your
second
board
here. Okay, we're going to
installed.
line it up. And no. See, I wasn't really paying attention there.
You can't even blame the focus.
Now, after the motherboard
Justin,
mounts are lightly
Justin,
tightened
listen,
up,
we want to
we
thank
need
you
to
so
ensure
much.
they're installed securely.
The pins may
The
have not been
manufacturer has
dropping for you
provided a
this
special
morning,
tool
but if
to
it's any
tighten their
consolation
risers,
to you,
so we'll utilise this
your
today to
bowling game
tighten these
has had all
up
of
to an
us
adequate
rolling here at the
tightness.
studio.
Then,
And
just to
ratings
check all, to
We've
ensure
got the
they're
highlights
seated
to
well
prove
and
it.
tightened correctly.
We're going to try to go for this spare here. We are reporting live in Wyoming this morning. Justin Kolar, News 8. Come on, baby.
Oh, it's so close.
So
I
now,
might go
before
for
we
the
put the
double.
It only
motherboard
took
down
5
into the
times.
I was
case,
gonna say,
there's one thing which
you are a
I've forgotten
testament
many
of if
times
at first you
earlier,
don't
which is the
succeed.
motherboard backing plate here,
Then
which
do it once
installs
and say
down
that you
here
did.
for the rear motherboard
on,
access
Justin.
points. Now, if we see on the board, the plate can install
gutter
in two
balls. You had to go for
orientations.
those too, right?
We need to check
really hope
that
I
it
don't
all
throw this
corresponds
comes
by
bowling ball in the
comparing
gutter.
it to the board itself. So when we know we have the right configuration, just bring it down, ensuring that everything else is out of the way. And then with a small
when we thought it
force,
couldn't get any
clip
worse,
the
he
backing
tried to
plate into place in the case. There are usually
thank you
4
for the
clicks that you will
entertainment,
hear when
just
installing
Justin.
this.
Now you
appreciate
guys
it.
see why I ran track in high school and college.
Now that the backing plate is installed, we can grab our
No, we just have
motherboard.
to get you a shirt.
Usually try to support the board by both the heatsink and by
Inside
hand.
joke there, West
To
Michigan.
install the board into the case, the best method is to install it with the rear of the board down first, making sure that the board lines up well with the rear mounting plate mounts and the motherboard mounts also. And then the motherboard is ready for install. So then we're on to mounting the motherboard. There are specific screws to do this, so check your case manual. And then install the motherboard screws in a diagonal fashion, loosely at first, until you have all in place, to ensure that you don't torque the motherboard if not initially mounted correctly. Then, when you're happy with their placement, completely do them up and you're in business. So at the front of the motherboard, we've got the case interface header. This header usually has installed the power and reset switch points and the interface to both the hard drive and power LEDs. Now as your LEDs are diodes, they need to be installed in the correct polarity, but your switches don't necessarily matter as the switch just shorts the 2 pins together. So we'll plug in our power LED one here, which requires positive to positive and negative to negative. Check your motherboard manual where the header is hard to read. Then we have our power switch, our reset switch, and then our hard drive LED interface. Keep note of the polarity for your LEDs and check that they correspond to that of your motherboard header. And as you see here, as a general rule of thumb, all of your motherboard case header connectors plug in with the text facing outward, but do check your motherboard manual to confirm. Here are your SATA data headers for your interface to your hard drives, solid state drives, DVD drives and other devices. On this particular board, the cream ones are our 6 gig connectors and these are our 3 gig connectors. The recommended configuration will be having the faster ports for our hard drive and solid state drive and the lesser bandwidth ports for our DVD drive. So now we're going to install our solid state drive, hard drive and DVD drive into the case. Now for airflow through the case, I'm going to remove this upper drive bay as we're not going to be utilising it in this case. We'll be using this bottom part here. So I'll just unbolt this here and solder it out. This enables the airflow from the fan in the front to flow through unobstructed. Time to install the solid state drive. Now, this case I'm using today comes with easy release drive bays. We need to install our drives in a particular facing direction though, so as you see the power and data connection points here, we're going to be installing it in this orientation. We can access the cables from the back of the case, and it allows for clean, unobstructed air path with proper cable management from the other side of the case. For this particular solid state drive, we have 4 holes in the bottom of the drive itself, which we just need to screw in through to mount. Again, screw in diagonally, solder in, and your solid state drive is installed. Then the same for the hard drive. Now, we're mounting our hard drive using the bottom mounting points. However, the hard drives also have side mounts, which are just as valid to install with. Again, Just checking that our data and power ports are in the correct orientation for cable management to slot in, and then install the screws nice and firm and solder into the case. Now it's time to install the DVD drive. At the front of the case, you'll find some plates which are removable to enable installation of the drive. Usually, to remove them, you'll find these two tabs at the back of the plate, which you need to squeeze together to push the bay cover forward and out of the case. To install the DVD drive into the case, insert it from the front of the case, slotting it in until it's flush with the front of the case. Then, on the side of the case, you'll see the through-hole mounting points on the case, two on this side which will install with the provided thumb screws. As there are several mounting points on the side of the case, ensure that the drive still remains flush as you install. And then do the same on the other side of the case. This is your 24-pin power connector and your primary power interface to your motherboard. It helps facilitate the motherboard onboard logic, powers the motherboard and some of the devices which are connected to it. This 6-pin plug here is your supplementary power connector for your graphics card. This is due to the motherboard not being able to supply the required power to the card itself. The 6-pin connector allows an additional 75 watts to be used by the card per connector installed, and as your usual card uses between 150 and 200 watts, you'll likely need to install these for your GPU. You can also see here that you can change this cable on this particular power supply to 8-pin configuration, which allows 150 watts per connector to be used. Noting this though, the 8-pin PCI Express supplementary power connector and the motherboard CPU power connector as shown on the right are not the same power connectors. The power pinout is different, and even though they are keyed differently, these should never be forced into their slots due to having the same number of pins. This is a legacy Molex power adapter, which is becoming somewhat obsolete in new builds. You may find older hard drives will use these, or where you have an older power supply, you may be able to use these to power your graphics card with additional adapters. This is your SATA power connector, which connects to your hard drive, solid state drive, and DVD drive. Note that it's notched on the left-hand side and that it can only install in one orientation. These are your SATA power and data connectors. Power on the left, data on the right. They're both notched and will only install in one orientation. The data connector will plug into your hard drive, solid state drive, and DVD drive to facilitate the data transfer. So what I've done here is pre-routed the cabling for the case. So we have the relevant cables left out for install, and the rest have been routed through and concealed on the back of the case to facilitate better airflow. I have pre-installed the motherboard to case interface headers, where their wires are ran concealed behind the back of the case. We have our SATA data connectors connected here. So on the 6GB SATA, which are the white ones, we have installed our solid state drive and behind it our hard drive. And on the 3GB ports, we have our DVD
which
drive.
can be shown on third-party websites. Am I right?
What
So
we've
how
also
are they
ran
shown?
through
Let's see
here
that.
are our
What
two
settings do you
PCI
choose?
Express power
On search network,
connectors
it's
for our
mainly about
graphics
keywords.
card.
Am I right? You select the
Our
keywords
USB
if
3
those
header
keywords
here,
are matching with the
and our
search
24-pin
term used by
motherboard power
end users.
connector.
Your ads have
Now what we'll
chances
do
to
is
serve.
install our
Correct?
24-pin motherboard
This is
power
the logic
connector.
of search network. Am I right? So in search network,
You'll see
keyword
here
is one
there
of
is a
the
retaining
biggest
clip on the
thing,
connector which
apart from
corresponds
audience.
to
You
the notch
remember
on the motherboard
you were
here.
trying to add audience
So all you have
also.
to do
When
is
you made
insert it
campaigns,
vertically
the in-market
with a
search
minor bit of
audience and
force
people
until it
looking for
clicks,
certain
and
products.
you're installed.
So it's purely on Google search network.
Now we have our USB 3 header connector, which is also notched to be connected. We're leaving our two PCI
Now,
Express
display
power
network, let's
connectors
see
out
what